Tonight, we are honored to have legendary artistic director of the Shakespeare Theater Company, who was recently inducted into the American Theater Hall of Fame and also is the honorary commander of the British Empire. In conversation with Rebecca Sheir,
I haven't changed my accent,
host of WAMU's Metro Connection. Welcome.
So Michael, you have a long and illustrious career, and I would like to go back, way back.
Uh-oh.
4th grade? Can you tell us about the junior players of Brooklyn Heights? I understand that's where you got your unofficial start.
Yeah, well, it's true. I always wanted, I don't know why, I always wanted to be a director when I was that young, actually. And I don't know why. My parents were not in the theater. My mother owned a dress shop in Lower Manhattan, and my father was a radio engineer, but they went to the theater. I think my father even went, actually, not grudgingly. He was a very tall man and kept complaining about how terrible the seats were, and I understand that now with no room. But I went, I don't know, I wanted to be a director. I was an only child, and I guess a bossy child. And so I went to a Quaker school. I went to Brooklyn Friends, and they were very good about my theater desires. So in the 1st grade, I wrote a play, and they let me take time out to write a play, and I wrote it about the Pony Express, and I took the Pony Express to Paris and to London. And what was wonderful, and this is why I'm a great supporter of arts education, is that they never told me that was impossible. They never said you can't swim, a horse to swim. I think they were pleased I knew something about London and Paris, but they encouraged my imagination. And so in the 2nd grade, I was able to direct a play, and I used to go to the ice shows. There were very big ice shows, and I was very fascinated by, people, big snowflakes, and, so I made a play about Jack Frost and the snowflakes, and I paid Jack Frost in a white terry cloth robe. So by the time the 4th year came around, and I formed a theater company, first of my many theater companies. I keep forgetting to add this one when I say I've been the artistic director of 5 companies. I was 6, that's right. The junior players of Brooklyn Heights. And we did a play based on I adapted from, God, it must have been awful. I adapted from a little story in a children's magazine and we did it, and we raised some money for CARE, which was money that went to Europe, which I lost, felt very badly about. But that was my first theater, and I was just very lucky that I went someplace that encouraged that, And that's what I think is the most important thing about arts education. Is not so much that, particularly, it certainly not necessarily makes you an artist, nor not even particularly that makes you appreciate art, but it actually allows you to think in a way, daydream in a way that a lot of society simply doesn't let you be. It's not practical, but it allows you to, use your imagination. And I don't know if you don't create young people who are able to think outside of the norm or outside of the box or imagine what isn't there, how you're going to have scientists or, good civic leaders. So I'm very grateful to Brooklyn Friends School and Mrs. Cook.
Mrs. Cook. So educationally, if we fast forward now to college, you were at Columbia, which is where I went as well.
I went to Performing Arts before that, the school that they made the movie of Fame about.
Oh, that's right.
So I went there.
So then in college you were directing, and
I went to Columbia, but I didn't ever direct at Columbia. I directed at Barnard.
Okay.
And I had a good time because by that time I knew some actors. I'd been studying acting, so they came. There were no men at Barnard, so I could bring in friends to act, and I could bring in friends as set designers. So my first show, which was Orphée of Cocteau, the set was designed by Andy Warhol, and the costumes were from Bergdorf Goodman and Henri Bendel.
Was this before Andy Warhol was Andy Warhol?
Yes, Andy Warhol was Andy Warhol, the designer of advertising for I. Miller shoes. He was a brilliant graphic designer. And, he made a set. It was on a scrim, and he made it out of a sort of collage out of newspaper and sheeting, and he tore it up and made these things. There were stars and moons, and then, quite frankly, the other thing I could see was erect penises. And this was a girls' college. And it was, you know, in the 50s, not the 60s. And so I said, we really can't have that, Andy. So he went and tore off the front part and said those were cherries.
So while you were making your start in New York, I read a quote that you said, "I remember walking down Broadway at that time, and there was nothing I wanted to direct, so I looked for other avenues." So my questions are, what did you want to direct, and what were those avenues that you wound up taking?
Well, you know, I was born in New York, so I obviously thought I was going to be working on Broadway. And but I didn't like music. I like musicals a lot better now. I didn't much like them then. You know, I'm an artist, and I didn't like what were prevalent on Broadway comedies, like, you know, Moon is Blue. That was a little before my time, but things like that were the staple. Now they're not on Broadway anymore because you get them on television all the time for half an hour. So I walked down Broadway and I thought I didn't want to do. I was very surprised. I looked and said, I don't want to do that play. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. And then the only play I did want to do, or thought I would like to do, was Night of the Iguana of Tennessee Williams. And so I didn't really, and I had been lucky at Barnard, not only to direct the Orphée, but also to direct Peer Gynt and Pericles, the New York premiere of Pericles by Shakespeare, because nobody else ever wanted to do it. And I did it, and I realized that I was very attracted to very complicated plays. I don't know if I knew what I was doing, but I was certainly attracted to it. So, I mean, I did a lot of, the first things I did were, I worked in La Mama, which is still there, the Café La Mama, and Café Chino, which were the sort of coffee house avant-garde theaters. And I was very lucky because it was a very, like it is now again, I think, a very fertile time for young playwrights. So I was doing Sam Shepard, I was doing Paul Foster, I was doing Lanford Wilson. I did all of Lanford's plays. I did a lot of Sam, and we were all growing up together. And so we worked in these coffee houses, and it was very exciting. And then I got a chance. Edward Albee had a playwriting workshop at a school that I was teaching little kids, Circle the Square, and they asked me if I would read a play that Edward was going to do in his workshop by a young writer. And so I read it, and it was by Adrienne Kennedy, a wonderful young black woman. And I did it, and then it was a very poetic and very metaphoric play. And Edward produced it off-Broadway and then gave me a few jobs after that when he started a theater. But luckily, Joseph Papp saw an afternoon of a play that I had done. There was only one performance in New York. And he called me in and he asked me if I would direct Measure for Measure. And I never wanted anything to do so much in my life, was to direct Measure for Measure.
This was in the park?
Yeah. I went to the Columbia Library. I read everything. I wrote down everything. I still have all these file cards that I wrote everything down about Measure for Measure and all my ideas and everything. And I did it. And that allowed me, from then on, to, I all of a sudden became a classical director from an avant-garde director. And luckily, I've been able to do pretty much what I want. But I worked for free forever in New York, for free. And I mean, and I'm glad I did, because I got a lot of opportunities to do things that didn't pay, that were really interesting to me, that I learned, and I met a lot of people, contemporaries of mine, that were all interested, and You know, I did a play by Jean-Claude Van Itali called War, and the costumes were by Robert Wilson, who was a student at Pratt, but he was still, you know, the same brilliant person that Robert Wilson, who became Robert Wilson, was. So it was a very fertile time, but I was lucky also. I was born in New York. I was brought up in New York, so somehow I kind of knew my way around. But I did, oh my God, I did all kinds of secretarial jobs, and once I stuffed for DJs' Christmases, I stuffed a Johnny Tillotson record and sent them out, thousands of them. It must have been payola or something, whatever it was. So I did all kinds of jobs so I could work for nothing.
I want to go back to Measure for Measure now. You've said it was that play was definitely informed by your more avant-garde work that you've been doing off-Broadway, and I understand that as rehearsals progressed, Joseph Papp, who headed the public, he became a bit, how shall we say, concerned about your unconventional approach? Okay, he hated it, yeah.
Well, first of all, the production had, the things that had influenced me the most when at that time in my life were the Kabuki and Martha Graham and Noguchi and Peter Brook. Not terribly bad people to be influenced by. And so when I was asked to do Measure for Measure, first of all, I saw it a little bit like Marat Sade, you know. So, oh my gosh. Haven't heard a word so far? Oh my gosh. Oh dear me. Oh, I'm not repeating. But anyway, he gave me this job, and I had all these ideas. But one of the things I thought it was actually I don't think so anymore. But I thought I was very influenced by Jan Kott too, who was a great person writing about Shakespeare, and so I thought it was a very black comedy, and it still can be played that way. So I thought it was, of course, it is a very urban play. So the first thing I told Ming Cho Lee, the extraordinary set designer, which is, I don't want to see a tree in Central Park. So that's who I was in those days. So we built big brick walls covering the entire gorgeous sylvan thing that people go to the park to see as the moon come up on the lake behind the theater. Well, you couldn't because it was just a big brick wall with a fire escape. And it began with a lot of Marat Sade people in the beginning and all that. Anyway, we had a good rehearsal, even though the original leading lady and leading man quit when they heard I was doing it. Where are they now? And no. I've worked with one of them since, and the other man sadly passed away. So anyway, it was a good rehearsal period, and we were having our dress rehearsal before the preview. And Joseph Papp came, and after it was over with, he told me how much he disliked it. He hated the set. I don't know if he thought we should put geraniums in I don't know what he thought. Pictures on the wall. I have no idea. And he went backstage, and he told the actors how poor it was. Right. So the next day, I mean, I was devastated. I mean, you know, I can laugh about it now, but you can imagine this was my first big play, and I was devastated. But I met the actors the next day, and I said, okay, you know it. Joe came through, and he told you, and he told me, and he doesn't like it. So I don't know whether I'm going to get fired tonight or not. And they very sweetly said, if you go, we will go. I think they said that. Anyway, Joe had told me that he was going to come to the last dress rehearsal, which was that night. And I called him up and I said, Joe, look, I haven't really been able to change it. I still have, you know, so I don't come tonight. You can't come tonight. I actually barred him from the park, his theater. I said, you can't come tonight. He said, well, I'll come tomorrow at the preview. And I called a few of my friends and I said, please come tomorrow. I know I'm going to be fired. It'll be the only time I'm ever going to do this play. And Joe arrived with Jerry Friedman, the artistic director, and a woman who's now his wife, or was his wife, his widow, now Gail Pap, and they were carrying, I remember these, not, it seems like huge, but these yellow pads with pencils, taking notes. I just knew it was all over. And it started, and somewhere in the second act, some man got up and left the theater. I thought, oh my God, it's a, oh my God, it's a failure. They're all going to leave. And then he came back 5 minutes later with a Frankfurter. True. Because I hadn't worked in the part before. I didn't know you could just eat, So anyway, it started to rain toward the very end of the play, and nobody left. And when it was over, they all rushed to their feet and screamed. And I still felt scared to death, but Joe came by and he apologized. And I said, please tell the actors to. And so, I got an award. I got the best reviews of any Shakespeare that year. The actors won the Obies, won other things like that. And I never worked for Joe Papp again. He never hired me. He never hired me again. Although he wanted to. He kept telling me, but he never could find the project until many years later, and I wasn't able to do it. But I was very grateful that he gave me the opportunity, and of course I fell in love with him, because anybody who would apologize that ego and apologize like that, how could you not love him? But the next year I was invited to Stratford, Connecticut, and I thought I was going to have both theaters, at 28 or 29, and anyway, I went to Connecticut, and I was there for a while.
So another biggie in the theater world with whom you've worked is John Houseman. He'd been following your work through the 1960s, and he invited you to join the founding faculty of Juilliard's drama division in New York City, which opened its doors in the late 60s. What effect did that experience have on you and your career, would you say?
I think a lot, Rebecca. Well, first of all, I hadn't taught very much. I taught somewhat at Circle in the Square. But I hadn't planned to be a teacher, and when John saw me, I was directing a play at Stratford, and he was directing one. And I guess he saw me directing, and he thought, well, they're starting the Juilliard School at Lincoln Center, and I would like to have this guy there. And of course I was very flattered, because he was famous for all the incredible young men that he mentored in his life. As a matter of fact, I knew a bunch of them, and I wondered at one point why wasn't I. But by the time John met me, I was older than some of the other people. And but I had gone to I'd gone to acting school, I'd gone to performing arts, and I had a wonderful teacher after that called Michael Howard, who was, really probably the most influential person in terms of my understanding about acting. And Michel Saint-Denis was the co-director of the school, and he had a very specific program of training, which we all read and learned about. And so it was very exciting to be part of a new faculty. I taught acting every day for 4 hours, because we had 32 students, and I had each class for 8, 8, 8, and 8 before I was year one. And I did that for 3 years until we had more than one class. But I learned, and I wasn't much older than my students in some cases, but I learned a lot about internal workings of an actor. I knew something about my own. I wasn't a very good actor, but I had learned a lot, something from Michael and from school. And working with all these young people, I began to learn from my mistakes, learn to somehow, well, I'll tell you what I think. There is no one way to act, and there is no one way to teach. There are certain things about relaxation and connection and use of the other person and playing off of them and not planning and all of the things that make a better actor and make the rehearsal process more interesting. But every actor has to arrive where they are differently. And I began to learn how to help different consciousness, different ways of thinking, feeling, from a bunch of different actors, and learned how you can shut somebody down and how you can help open them up. And as a director, I began to see that I was able to shut actors down in the wrong way by asking too much too soon, by quite frankly being so strong and opinionated that they abdicated to you, think, well, you know more than I do, so let you tell me how to do it, which at then end you don't like at all because, you know, you might as well have puppets, you know. I mean, you really want the other person to bring you something. So I learned a lot. And then over the years, I learned, I don't even know whose work I'm influenced by now, but I also got fearless in learning just when an actor starts, when an actor jumps, or when an actor doesn't come in with something that's valuable from the previous circumstances, or when they have missed a moment and then for 2 moments later they desperately try to catch up and show you that I learned a lot of things from, but I also learned as a director a certain practicality that mixed with idealism I hope I could impart to students. And I actually could say that I'm a very good teacher. I mean, I'm told that about many actors, and I'm fearless now in a way. I mean, I used to feel, oh my God, I can't say something to somebody unless I know a lot about them, and now they can do a scene, and I pretty much dare to just go right in and try to see where they are stopping themselves, or so. But I also could give an actor some sense of practicality, you know, that I know what the world is like. And I'm very grateful that I did both of those things. I think I was very lucky that I could do both those, which may make me less a conceptual director than I might have been if I hadn't started teaching and become so interested in the inside of an actor rather than the outside of a production. So I might have been much more conceptual if I hadn't started teaching. But I think I know how to help an actor, and I don't know what else is more important than doing that. You're casting very well and then trying to get the best out of that person. Anyway, that's a long answer to
That's a good answer.
a nice question. But
So we've talked about your work as a teacher and director. What we haven't really addressed is your business acumen in theater.
my business,
Your business acumen, absolutely, because you headed up the American Shakespeare Festival. You also headed up Princeton's McCarter Theater Center, and you had a lot of artistic success there, but they were also kind of on the brink of ruin when you came on
all
board,
at the
no?
same time, yeah.
So how did you bring them back to their feet?
Well, I drank a lot. No, I don't know if well, I did save a few theaters, but not personally. I mean, I think, I was brought down here to, save the Folger, and I did. But through work, not through any fantastic ability about fundraising or that. I've always thought that if you do the best work you know how, the people and the support will come. And and saved. I kept the McCarter alive, and it still is alive and flourishing very well. When I took it over, I was running Stratford, and I was asked if I would like to be the director of the McCarter Theater, and I was very excited because who was doing two big theaters at the same time? Nobody, me. So I was very impressed with myself. But also the danger was that both theaters were running into big financial trouble. They were running into financial trouble at the McCarter because Princeton, which runs the McCarter, finally didn't want to pick up the deficit, which was exactly what happened at the Folger when Amherst, who owned the Folger Library, did not want to pick up the deficit. By that time, I had a reputation in the theater, and so funders, a couple of foundations, were actually interested in the idea that I was doing both these theaters, and the Princeton board was not very constituted, as indeed neither was the Folger board at the time, to go out and raise money. And so, the, it's so boring, but the problem at Princeton was that Princeton wanted all the money from the community for their own stuff, so they wouldn't let you go to any corporations. It was just full of drug corporations right up and down outside of Princeton, but you couldn't go to any of them because they were all on hold for Princeton development. So they said they were going to close, and I called up a friend of mine around the Ford Foundation theater program, and she said, "Oh, we'll have to do something about that." She said, "I'd like to have a meeting with the board." And so the board all came and sat on one side of the table, and she put me on the other side of the table with her, and she said, "You know, we're not going to let you close this theater." And that was that. They just realized that there were some allies, and they were going to put some money in it. And eventually we did very good work. But when it got into trouble again, and this is the last thing I say about this, when it got into trouble again, I did what I would never do again. I betrayed my own sense of what was important, and I started doing things that I thought would be commercial and attract other audiences. So I brought in some plays with stars that weren't very good. I produced a couple of plays that I didn't believe in, and people came, but those were not people who were going to come back again, and they were not people who were going to feel that this theater had something to say to them, and I quit. And I quit being an artistic director for a bunch of years. I don't talk about this much, but I thought maybe I won't direct again, and so I started teaching everywhere. I taught in Juilliard, NYU, Circle in the Square. The joke was in New York that if you didn't want to study with Michael Kahn, you had to move to Chicago. It's true, because I was teaching everywhere. And the great thing for me was that I never had to buy a drink in a restaurant because a student of mine was serving it. And I swore when I took the job at the Folger, I said, and this was, I hadn't really run a theater, and I'd done some Broadway shows that were, one was not very good, one was okay, but I wasn't really directing very much, and I thought, okay, I'll never direct again, maybe I'll never direct again. I certainly didn't want to do Shakespeare. I quit Stratford after 12 years because I thought I have nothing more to say about this extraordinary writer. So, but I started working at Juilliard on Shakespeare scenes, and I got encouraged by them. And I got to say to myself, I thought maybe I might have some new ideas about Shakespeare. And so when the Folger, was going to close, called me up and asked me if I'd be interested, I said yes, because I loved the idea of a small theater. I was playing at 1,500-seat theaters as well, with both Stratford and McCarter. But I didn't know even whether I had it in me to do Shakespeare anymore. But I did say very clearly to the people who invited me that I would never do what I did at McCarter again. That either I would try to have the best classical theater that I knew how, and I wasn't so sure at that point that I actually knew how, and I would do the best work, and I would fight for the resources to do the best work, which is more rehearsal time, better, all of that. But if I couldn't do that, as far as I was concerned, the theater could close, because we didn't need a second or third rate anything anywhere. And if that's what I had to make it in order to exist, it wasn't going to be me, and I also don't believe in that. I don't believe that a building is the reason why you should have something. Although this is a great example of the answer that if there is a building, you could put something really good in it. So, and I still feel that way. And I still struggle with, what do we all have to do nowadays to try to get people in the door? But are the people in the door going to stay there? Or are they just coming for one show? And what does that mean? So we all struggle with that now. And what's your identity? And your identity is that's the soul of the theater. So anyway, we're all struggling with that these days.
You and Shakespeare have been quite tight through the years.
What?
You and Shakespeare have been quite tight through the years, beginning with Pericles. And in the mid-'90s, you directed Henry V, starring Harry Hamlin. And I've read you wrote that's when I realized that Shakespeare tells us not what to think, but what to think about. How has that affected the directing of Shakespeare's plays that you've done, realizing that?
Well, when I as I said about Measure for Measure, I thought this was black comedy. I thought Angelo was this sort of Tartuffe, but this sort of bitterly comic Tartuffe. Actually, a bunch of actors came and read for the play. That's how I met Stacy Keach, because he read for the Duke, but we didn't do it. And a very young Dustin Hoffman came in and he read for Elbow, and I knew that he had done a View from the Bridge, and he came in and he read for Elbow, and I thought that's exactly who I want for Angelo, and I went to his house. I did everything to beg him to do it. He didn't want to. He was too scared. And he wasn't Dustin Hoffman, as we know now. But he wanted to do Elbow, but I wanted to do Angelo. But I thought that play, I wanted it to be about what I thought it was about. And when I did Henry V the first time at Stratford, it was right in the middle of the Vietnam War, and I was very much against the war, like most people in my generation. And I was doing what I thought was this jingoistic play to open my artistic directorship of Stratford. And I said, it's an anti-war play. I saw two things in the play: the killing of the French and the way the church gets Henry to go to war in order not to pay taxes. And I thought, it's a cynical anti-war play, and it made my career, to be honest with you, because it was very conceptualized. It was all on the jungle gym, and I used a lot of kabuki things, sticks, and I had Brechtian titles for each scene. I mean, it was pretty splendid, and but I couldn't make any sense of the big speeches. I kept all the great speeches. I said, they're lies. It's just publicity, It's just, and I mean, it was a famous production on one level. And there's still pictures of it in books, say, make it sound like it's a now production. But I couldn't make Once More Into the Breach make any sense other than some bloodthirsty man pretending to people that because he's going to make them cannon fodder. I just did that over and over and over and over again. And when I got to it again here, I borrowed some of the theater techniques I used then, but I realized as I had begun to realize, that the play is an exploration of leadership and the difficulties of leadership and what you may or may not do in leadership. And you may do this on one hand in a kind of shiny example of, fantastic ability and care for your country. And you might do this over there because of some realpolitik reason. And that Shakespeare is an explorer, a scientist of issues. He is not a moralist. If he was a moralist, we wouldn't keep reviving him, because he would have told us the same thing over and over again, and we would either agree or disagree with him, but we would never be struck to think by him. So I realized that, and I said that once by accident, that he doesn't tell us what to think, he tells us what to think about. And that would be the best kind of production for me, which would be one in which there's a dialogue between the writer, who is exploring all of this, and you come with your prejudices, with your concerns, with your ideas, and maybe all of it gets sort of, after the play over, you begin to talk about yes or no, or why, or why did he do that, or maybe, and you begin to perhaps open up your own feelings about what you brought in with about the issues of the play, which also means for me that the director has to get, see, when you're a young director, you have to get through the noise. There are so many other young directors. Like in any profession, there are a lot of yous around. And how do you become the person that they listen to with so many other yous? So, of course, as young directors, and brilliantly, and I was one of them, present their personality in a huge way in a production, or find a production which you could do that, which I did with Measure for Measure, and which I did with Henry V. And when I came back to do Measure for Measure here, I realized that Angelo inherits an impossible situation of a city that is completely gone to the dogs, with paying no attention to law, which the leader of it has simply been unable to control, and he gives this guy who has never been in power ever this job. So all of a sudden Angelo became to me, of course he is his draconian policies are without conscience, but he's struggling to find a way. And then he gets caught up in his own sexual repression and the loosening of it. So I now try to present all these sort of sides in an evening, which means that you have to get a little bit out of your own way, And since I'm no longer I have the sort of luxury of not having to prove myself anymore. If I have a flop, I have a flop. And if I never work again, I've had a terrific life. So, I'm amazed that I'm still working at my age, So while I would like to continue working, and I'd love everybody to like my work, I've had enough flops. I've had enough I had a one-night Broadway musical, closed on the opening night, should have closed during the intermission, I say. But so I don't have to prove myself anymore. So I just try to do the thing I most believe in a play. And I hope that keeps the play open to what maybe Shakespeare is trying to talk to us. I don't think Shakespeare takes sides, and I don't see any evidence that he takes sides. Otherwise, why would there be forgiveness at the end of most of his plays? Yeah. Why do people forgive Angelo? It's very difficult, but they do forgive him. Now, there are productions, for instance, in which, including this one, where he's not forgiven. And that's fine. But, Shakespeare forgives him. And he has the characters forgive him. So if the director doesn't want to do that, that's fine. But Shakespeare forgives him. So maybe it's more interesting to try to figure out why that is, rather than decide, well, nobody could do that. Nobody could forgive you. Well, Shakespeare did, so maybe it's our job to try to figure out in some incredible way why. Why does Hermione forgive Leontes? No woman would. But Shakespeare has her forgiving him. Why? That's the interesting question to me.
You've said American actors are wonderfully suited to do Shakespeare. What is it about American actors that make them so, primed for...
You probably are one too.
I've never done Shakespeare.
Well, you know what it is. It's everybody. First of all, you do need some training. What kind of training? First of all, Americans have this incredible physicality, which is very good for Shakespeare. They also have a deep emotional ability to connect to characters, which is also good for Shakespeare, if you want to make them human. What Americans don't have, and have less and less and less and less, is any interest in the coloration of words. Now, nowadays, most of us talk, with no variety, and it's sort of cool not to have any variety. And as a matter of fact, I'm doing a play at Signature now where the minute an actor has some variety, the playwright hates it. So they're coloring the words. And I say, well, okay, we won't color the words. Let's just talk like this. And that's fine. It's fine. But there is an actor who colors his words in real life. He's not being actory, but I stopped all that. He's not coloring his words. However, that doesn't do very well for Shakespeare. And so you need a bunch of technical skills. First of all, you need to have final consonants. If you don't have a final consonant, well, you know what it's like if you don't have a final consonant, then and you can't speak too slowly in Shakespeare. You know, a lot of people think making Shakespeare's clear is go to be or not to be. That is the question. As I'm thinking it, finding it, well, you're so lost, you know, you're so back as that is, and wondering what is. So, but if you don't have any final consonants and you speak rather swiftly, all the words will run together and you won't understand them either. So you need that. You need breath control so you don't have to break up every line of verse in the middle of it where Shakespeare didn't want you to. And you have to have some vocal varieties because whoever wants to listen to anybody talking for 3 hours that sounds the same all the way through it. But Americans have the daring and the emotional connection and the physicality. If they also have that, that makes them wonderful Shakespeare actors. And people who do musicals, great musical theater artists, are pretty terrific at Shakespeare too, because they can take a song and an aria and tell you a story with those words and those songs. That you have to do with an aria. You have to do with a soliloquy too. Mm-hmm. But Shakespeare acting is the Olympics of acting, and you need an awful lot of stuff. And I admire anybody who does it, and very, very few of us ever do it brilliantly. But it's fun if you want to do it. So,
is there a Shakespeare play you have not yet directed that you would like to?
the what?
Is there a Shakespeare play that you would love to direct that you haven't had the chance to?
No. There used to be, but after 25 years of the Shakespeare Theater, no. There may be some Shakespeare plays these people don't want to see me do ever again. but no, and I'm actually doing in the spring something that I have wanted to do that I didn't get to do, and that was to do both parts of Henry IV, Part 1 and Part 2 separately. I did them very happily in one evening, and when I did that the last time, I thought I would love, because they're my favorite plays, because they're a whole world of everything you could imagine, every problem that we have, every part of society, I mean, everything, politics, family, God, everything. And I thought by cutting so much, I didn't explore how rich it was. So I'm going to do both parts. So that's something I had always wanted to do. And I'm doing it. And I think that actually is probably the last something I want to do of Shakespeare in terms of that. There are other plays I'd like to do, but not maybe. I've done all the Shakespeare. And the ones I haven't done, like Midsummer Night's Dream, scares me to death because I saw Peter Brook's production 30 years ago, and nothing will ever be that good. And I don't really want to do Comedy of Errors or Taming of the Shrew. I don't ever want to do. And though I like other people doing these things. And I will do The Tempest, which is the one play probably I should do that I haven't done. But I'm very scared about doing The Tempest because I've been very bored by The Tempest very often when Miranda falls asleep and Prospero keeps talking. And I haven't figured that out yet. But I think I'll be doing it soon.
Moving away from, well, I want to open it up to the audience, but one more question. Moving away from Shakespeare, right now you have a non-Shakespearean production running at Studio Theater.
Yes, I
Torch
do. Song
Trilogy. And you tell a wonderful story of when that won the Tony Award in the 80s. Can you tell that story?
Well, let me first of all say that Eric has done a wonderful music for it, but I just had a wonderful time doing that play, and I didn't know. I saw it at Cafe La Mama in 1979. I saw one of the parts of it, and I must have seen another part of it because I remember seeing Matthew Broderick, who played the boyfriend in the movie, played the son in the Off-Broadway. not on Broadway because I was Fisher Stevens. But I went to it when it was on Broadway, and I loved it. And I was nominated for Tony that year for Showboat, and I was sitting behind at the Tony Awards. I was sitting the only time I'd been nominated for Tony, sitting behind Harvey Firestein and the producer of the play, John Glines. And it had been such an extraordinary thing to have that play come from off-Broadway and be on Broadway, to have that play, which is so about gay life, and to have someone like Harvey come from basically the avant-garde, trash avant-garde part of, I mean, that was kind of what the kind of plays he was writing. Even be up for a Tony, and we all thought somebody else would win, and when he won, it was just so emotional. I was sitting behind them, and they were crying, and I was crying, because it was like a victory for all of us. But I never thought of doing it, and when David Muse asked me to do a play, and I said I really wanted to do a gay play, because I hadn't done that, and so I read a bunch, and I read Torchlight, which I had not thought about for 30 years, and I thought, this is a really, really, really good play. And so I brought it to studio, and David very courageously said yes, because it's, the joke is, I said, they brought Michael Kahn to the studio to do a play even longer than the ones he does at the Shakespeare Theater. But it's like when I did all of Henry IV in one evening, or all of Henry VI in one evening. If it holds, it holds, and it doesn't. And time goes by in a very strange and relative manner. And I'm very proud of the fact that people respond to that play so fully, and are so surprised that they're there, that they keep saying, "Oh, I could have stayed for another 2 hours," because the performances are so good. So. I'm very glad I did it, and that was it. And it became it's not the story of my life, but it just became something very personal for us all to do, a play that we cared about, and we cared about the people, and we understood their problems, and they're everybody's problems. I mean, what I love is people come to me and say, "My God, this is about relationships, any kind of relationship," and that's what it is. So, and I'm very pleased we did it, and. That was something that wasn't a dream of mine, but once I was doing it, it was.
Well, at this point, I would love to open it up to you. If anyone has a question they would like to ask Michael, comment.
Or you, maybe.
Right there in the back.
Michael, you're justly renowned as a Shakespearean director, but you've also done Tennessee Williams, including some pretty controversial things like 5 by 10, Take Monoreal. There is a picture of Tennessee Williams sitting in a white chair with a hat.
Yes, you know the end of the story. Yeah, there's a famous picture of Tennessee sitting in a wicker chair with a white suit and a white hat, or actually my porch in Connecticut. It's about as northern there you could be. I did a production of Cat on Tin Roof, the first revival of it. I started at Stratford, and Tennessee came up to work on the play and redo the third act, and so he was there all the time, and we became friends, and so that picture that was taken, I had a wicker porch and a lot of palm trees. I had never worked with anybody like Tennessee Williams in my life before. I mean, a hero, an icon, a live one. I've been working with the dead one, but I never with a live one. And when I don't know if I told the story, but when I was told, I said I wanted to do Cat on Tin Roof, and at Stratford, because I thought this is an American classic, and I think it's a classic, and it's a classic theater, and I think Tennessee Williams belongs here in American Shakespeare Festival. So they said, well, you'd have to go meet him and get his approval. So. I went to the hotel where he was living in the East 50s in New York, and I went up. I was told to go up, and I knocked on the door, and the door opened, and a young man named Robert, who was his companion at the time, said, "Tennessee will be out soon. Please sit down. Do you want a drink?" And no. And finally came out, and I mean, I was so nervous, and he was sort of nervous. He giggled a lot, But we talked, and then the doorbell rang, and Tennessee went over to open it, and this little woman came in, and he threw his arms around her, and it was his sister Rose, who, had had a lobotomy at a young age and was obviously out of the institution that she was living in for the day. So I, was gone. My God, it's the real Tom and the real Laura, from Glass Menagerie. And that was one of the incredible experiences of my life. And anyway, Tennessee and I became friends, really friends. And, really friends. We were professional friends. But the Cat and Hot was a very big success for us all in New York. It moved to Broadway. It was here, but I think it went to Broadway first and then came here, the Kennedy Center. And Elizabeth Ashley had a great personal triumph in it. And I went to Venice because I used to go to Venice every summer. And I was at the swimming pool, and everybody knew that I was the director of this big show in New York called Cat and Hut and Roof. And everybody was, it's a small town, so if anybody comes in new that means anything, they make a big fuss over you, It was so bored, there's nothing else going on. And so everybody, this is the director, Tennessee Williams, So Tennessee Williams shows up. He's staying in that hotel where I was, and he's swimming, and he says, "Hello, Milton." So they all thought I was lying through my teeth. Finally, one day I said to somebody who was with me, I said, "Could you please tell Tennessee that my name is Michael? He knows it's Michael." And he said, "Yeah, what?" He said, I thought I knew that boy's name, but I just couldn't remember it. I don't know. Anyway, he came to see what streetcar I did, and he wrote a play for the leading lady, and he gave me a play to do, and it wasn't very good, and I didn't do it. But in his memoirs, it says I'm doing it, but that's about it. But it was an incredible experience for me to work with somebody like that. And that's a great poet. He's a great poet, and it was a privilege, real privilege.
Next question? Right here in the front.
Who were the local actors that you enjoyed working with?
Oh, come on, Steve. You think I'm going to say that? Does that mean the other people I don't like? Oh, who do I like? Oh, no. I wouldn't dream of saying that. But you know. I mean, I would say a lot of the usual suspects. I love working with Ed Jarreau, and he'll be playing Henry IV opposite Stacy Keach. I had never worked with Holly Twyford until I did Old Times for Her, the Pinter play, and that was an extraordinarily wonderful experience. And we've been looking for another play to do together that I really wanted to do with her. But one of the great joys of my life was when I came to Washington and I didn't know anybody, and I auditioned people, and on the very first day of auditions, Franchelle Stewart Dorn showed up. And she became my leading lady for the next 8 years until she went and joined her husband in Austin, Texas. It's a great loss to us. But I don't know where this theater would have been without Ed, Floyd, Franchelle. And that's true. And now I'm very pleased that there's some other actors who I brought here who are now Washington actors, like Tom Story, who are doing really wonderful work everywhere. And was amazing last night at the gala, singing and dancing. Oh my God! And there are, and I like working with Sarah, and of course I've used Nancy Robinette a lot. So, and I'll tell you what's good. I mean, it was true that when I got here, there were only a few actors who really could do Shakespeare. They could do a lot of other things, but there was only a certain amount of Shakespeare experience in some of these people. And there's more now. But what is great is that actors, I think, can stay in Washington now. There's enough work, and theaters are actually starting to pay so that there's a reason to stay. And that's extremely, extremely important. And those people know that I love them, so it's not a big surprise. And when I did Government Inspector last year, it was a whole Washington company except for Derek Smith, And everybody was fantastic. I mean, Brick and Sarah and Hugh and Harry, everybody. And it was a perfect play for them. And I've been looking for another one to try to do with all of those people again. I haven't found it yet. But we were like a family, and we had a wonderful time. But when I got to Washington, and I did my obligatory Washington Post article, David Richards, who was then the writer, reviewer too, said, Michael, because he knew me from Stratford, because he had been coming up to Stratford as a reviewer, are you going to hire Washington actors? And I said, at least that's how I was quoted, I am being asked to be the director of the Shakespeare Theater Company at the Folger, not the Washington Shakespeare Company at the Folger. Meaning that I thought these plays demanded the best artists for these plays, wherever they came from. And I still believe that. But they're very grateful that I made that statement, because the Washington Shakespeare Company took that and called themselves the Washington Shakespeare Company because of what I wrote, what David wrote. So when they had a big gala, they asked me to come and say that statement again on the stage, because they knew there was no Washington Stage Company. People thought I was, years later, I'd been putting them down. There just wasn't anything like that. They just took the name. But I believe still that these plays demand the best people you can get, if you can get them. And some of them are here and some of them aren't. But there's plenty of work. There's so much work now, for certainly between the Folger. There's somebody over here I know and somebody over there.
Coming on, I was curious if you had any comments on the recent changes.
Sorry?
I was curious if you had any comments on the recent changes in the Helen Davis.
How much did you have to do with it? Do you have anything to do with it?
I guess I'm an anonymous judge, but I guess I'm affected by it.
Well, I just don't know what we're going to do with 42 awards on the evening. But I have, probably everybody knows, that I have always thought that it would be nice, as many other major theater cities, which Washington is now, had awards for one kind of theater and awards for smaller theaters. That's what they have. It makes sense. It seems to me more people would get awards. And pitting sometimes a kind of theater with a huge amount of resources, or doing a certain kind of play against a theater that doesn't have those opportunities but does something, it doesn't make quite sense. And theaters that, every major city, Philadelphia, Chicago, Boston, LA, San Francisco, have divided awards. And everybody is clearer about it. So I've been advocating for that for about 12 years. Not getting anywhere. This version, which I think is better, is a little bit strange because it's based on the number of equity people. But I don't know what kind of evening 42 awards is going to be. I just have no idea. I don't want to go. But I think when you become a sophisticated theater town as this, you have to begin to say you are a theater town, and it's not just about boosterism, it's about excellence, and that's my version of it. But who am I?
Yes, right here.
But yes.
Are there any directors in town that you admire?
Oh, of course. Of course. Well, first of all, of course, I admire David Muse, and I admire Eric Schaefer. I admire Howard. I admire Jerry Whidden. I admire John Vreeke. I admire Ari Roth. Yeah, I do. And I know there's some young people coming up that, yeah. It's a little harder to get started as a director because there's only one director for a play, whereas there are 15 actors, so it's a little more difficult. But yes, there are. Oh, I think we have a huge amount of talent in Washington, really huge. And I must say that there is beginning to be a diminution of attendance at every theater. There is.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think if we all knew, we'd all solve it. I think there are many reasons. I think it's generational, it's almost can be seen as a generational shift of a certain age group that has not been brought up to go to the theater. It doesn't really think of the theater except on very special occasions. Don't have a sort of regular theater going habit, and not particularly attuned to going a lot to the theater. You know, when I got here, there were only 5 or 6 theaters. There was only maybe 3, actually. And we were full for years and years and years. And now there are a great many theaters, which is lovely, many of whom don't have more than 10 or 12 people a night in their house. And we were not a restaurant. We were not a foodie center. We are. And I'm on 14th Street at Studio, and I go up the block, and they're packed with people under 35 and having a wonderful time and being at the place that is the it place right now. And theater is not the it place for a lot of people right now. So certain shows are, but as a general rule, probably not. And so that, and I think a lot of it has to do with parents not having taken their kids to the theater, having put them in front of a television set or in front of I'll go out and you watch Little Mermaid on the DVD. And I think all of those things are, you know, we can blame ourselves about the kind of work we do, or, you know, are we with it, are we not with it? But I think it's also, there's a generation that just hasn't got it in the same way going to the movies, or even now not going to the movies. So it's different, and I don't know what the solution to it is. And on top of that, of course, financing from the government doesn't exist, and all of those kind of things. But we still believe in it.
In the front row.
Mr. Kahn, I became so many scenes of over 40 years, and many of them you have been here. My husband and I have been loving your work. And I think a number of us, generationally in this room, realize that we have been so blessed to have you, company members, living here among us. One of the recent scenes I paint, Starbucks at the corner, early morning, and the young actors came in who were on their way to classes this summer from all over the country. The conversation was so literate, so alive. They were so excited. They spoke so beautifully, and we had a ball. I thank you for everything
That's very
you
sweet.
have added to
Well.
your incredible talent,
Thank you.
your humble walk among us, your humor. Barbara Wells wanted to be here tonight, and she couldn't.
You don't think I'm legendary?
But she said in her email, Michael is a hoot. So she was sorry she couldn't be here tonight. But I thank you. And I was in New York in the 60s.
Yeah.
With Hagen and the studio.
Yeah, right.
And finding my way in the days to Central Park. Somehow I missed your measure.
I was only there once.
A lot of the others. And God, I came here. We just kept loving theater.
Oh, God. Well, we wouldn't be here for all of you. You all didn't need to come on Monday night to this, believe me, so you must care about the theater.
The last scene or so, I was delirious with Lloyd King and Ted as they took it away in the scenes, which the
In what you do.
brilliance
Yeah.
of their portrayals of age, but their art influenced that.
Well.
So these, Ed Jarrow, all of it. Thank you, thank you.
Oh, that's very sweet of you. Thank you.
Yes.
I have 2 questions, actually. One is one I asked you years ago, Michael, when you and I were discussing funding issues for the Shakespeare. And that is when you were going to do Ibsen's Enemy of the People. And you did it once, I believe. I think it is time for that to happen again in Washington. The other thing
Well,
I would like to ask you to work a deal with us here at Yale Center and start doing classes and theater
for kids.
for children.
Yeah.
at Yale Center.
Yeah, we don't need to talk about it, but we have a program where our actors and our educators are now in every school, every district school, every middle and junior high school, and in the charter schools now. So we're in 52 schools. But that's just the beginning, and we do work with them, and then we are now getting each ninth grade to come to a play. But younger than that, we don't have the facilities for. But we have always talked about what we could do for an hour-long or a 45-minute kind of Shakespeare for 12 and under. Because, we have this summer camp, and I was in the men's room, but it was the little boys' room because it was summer camp, and there was a little boy really little boy in the men's room too. And I said, "Oh, are you going to camp?" He said, "Yes, I am." And I said, "Oh, good." I said, I said, "What are you playing?" He said, "I'm playing Timon of Athens." So, kids actually like it. So I think it would be a wonderful idea. I think the Folgers is a perfect organization to do it because they've got a space that's not too big. So maybe we could talk to them about doing really, it would be good for them. Our space is so big.
I actually think that's all the time we have for tonight. But thank you so much, everyone, for coming out to the first of this series with Michael Kahn.